Okay, it looks like we're live. I'll wait a couple of seconds for it to catch up just because you never know. Um, yeah, so I decided to go live today because I didn't yesterday, and more importantly, because I finally watched Velma um, on HBO Max. So Velma Velma happened. God, how do you even start that conversation? Um, it's not well liked by critics, and it's really, really not well liked by the audience. 7% audience score. Um, if I were a real POS, I would go and find all the other properties that have an 8% audience score. But I feel like that's hurtful for hurtful sake. Yeah. So I want to today. Let me show you the chart. Oh, hold on, actually. Guess I should have put my camera on before I went live, huh? I want to today show you my chart because I think there's a way to fix Velma. So let's go ahead and look at this chart for a second. I'll go through it. It's probably hard to read on your phone if you're watching on your phone, but the short and the long of it is I'm gonna try to go through and break down what I think is working and what I think is not working about Velma. Specifically on the right side over here, the purple side. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on the purple of it all. Quality of lead roles. Yeah, I got it. Okay. Yeah, so this is the rubric that I use all the time when I'm reading scripts for competitions, agencies, production companies, whatever. They all have different sort of rubrics or different ways of doing it. I've also worked with people, producers who just straight up are like, "Tell me if it's good or not." Um, I'm a big believer in the rubric just because I'm one person's opinion, and I like what I like, and I don't like what I don't like. And when I'm reading for somebody, I try to make sure that my opinion is their opinion. But at the end of the day, we're all people, and we have all the different interpretations. And let's be honest, I'm basically illiterate, so there's that. Anyway, looking at the chart here, we got concept. So concept being what is the premise? In this case, it's Scooby Doo, but it's the point of view of Velma, and it's a sort of it's an update character study on Velma in the Scooby Doo ensemble. Originality, how original is this idea? We'll talk about that. Commercial viability, well, it's on HBO Max, so I don't know if that card necessarily counts. Cinematic potential, um, yeah, I mean for this, I'll go through it, but I think the animation's actually quite interesting, quite worthwhile, except for a thing, and I'll get into that. Quality of lead roles, it's the Scooby Doo ensemble kind of. So you're either into it or you're not. To their credit, they all have celebrity comedians as the ensemble, which I very much appreciate. Um, and then let's see, emotional resonance. Does it get you in the heart butt? Does it kick you right in the heart butt? Thematic resonance, is it relevant to what it's addressing, or is it relevant to the moment of time it's addressing? Blah blah blah. Is it culturally relevant? Is it thematically relevant? Blah blah blah. Uniqueness and development of world. I should have worn glasses because it's just far away enough that it's hard to see. And that's in this case again Scooby Doo. Tone is tricky, and then X Factor is the X Factor of it all. So that's my rubric for scoring scripts. I think it's very much applies to what we're doing here today. But that's what it is. Let me go back. But before we even do that, I think it's worth just having a bit of a chat about Velma the property, Velma the show. Um, it's Charlie Grandy, who I believe is from Mindy's the Mindy Project. He wrote for The Office. He wrote for Saturday Night Live. He wrote for the Mindy Project, and a bunch of other things, Champions apparently, which I did not see. So he's a company man. He probably has an overall deal at NBC. No big deal, um, or maybe not. I don't know. Does NBC and HBO Max, do they talk? I don't know. But he's got Emmys. He's got, let's see if it'll let me click on it without asking me. Yeah, so he won Primetime Emmy for Saturday Night Live. The Daily Show. He's been nominated. He won for Against Saturday Night Live, The Office. Yeah. So this guy's got an absolutely incredible pedigree. Even if you don't count for the fact that I think he was co-showrunner on the Mindy Project. I'm sure I'm wrong, but that's my best guess. So this guy's not nobody. Um, but then this show happened, and like if I were to pitch this to somebody, I'd say it's a Gen Z, or it's an up to date rehash of the origin story that is Velma from Velma's point of view instead of the ensemble point of view that Scooby Doo traditionally has. The idea being she lives in a much darker, much more nuanced world where race and gender and sort of the insidiousness of the human experience is much more of a thing instead of sort of the squeaky clean 1950s, 1960s definition of what Scooby Doo really was. I missed a lot, but you know, it is what it is. It's also animated kind of like a American anime, is what I would say. It's cell shaded, but it's very much like I don't know. Yeah, that'd be my pitch. Would I have watched it organically? I would have, because I like Scooby Doo. I like the Scooby Doo characters. The ones that were for me were the Freddie Prinze and that era of Scooby Doo movies, which are pretty obnoxious. I grew up on a pup named Scooby Doo. I watched all the old Scooby Doos. I think I've seen probably at least half of all the original run of Scooby Doos just because it was always on when I was coming home from school as a child. Um, yeah, so I was into it. I was into the idea of seeing a new Scooby Doo. They basically put out a Scooby Doo every like 6 months or every year. Usually, it's set up for kids because it's inherently a kids show. It's about learning. It's about cooperation. It's about solving riddles and mysteries, and it's about addressing what is scary until you know what it is. It's the whole demasking, and you realize it's not scary as soon as you take the mask off and you realize it's people. It's that. I think that was what was so attractive to me about Scooby Doo as a kid is the whole take the mask off and you just find people. Oh, my mouse is behaving badly. Um, this is not that. This is an entirely different take. Lessons learned from the original Scoobies. I don't know. That's gonna go into this whole breakdown that I'm gonna do. But you know, I there's a weird push and pull in that Hollywood, especially the last 10, 15 years, really loves intellectual property, IP, if you've ever heard that. The idea that it's already established, there's already a fan base, and therefore, if we make something else with that intellectual property, the fans will already show up and the fans will love it because it's fan service, because it's already there. You don't have to go through the trouble of building and all the risk and all that kind of stuff of a new idea. However, if you've ever seen anything I've ever done, I'm about the new idea because every intellectual property started as a new idea. Even if you're talking about King Arthur, even if you're talking about Tall Tales and Babe the Blue Ox and that whatever that guy's name is, I forget now. You know, the American Giant. All that stuff, even if it's legend, even if it's just open intellectual property because nobody has a copyright for it because it's so old, it had to start somewhere. The Bible, the Quran. Anyway, my point is, you're not gonna get Star Wars without the first Star Wars, which was an original idea that George Lucas struggled and scraped and feuded with people in order to get made. And now we have every version of Star Wars you could think of, for better or worse. That's what you're doing with intellectual property. So yes, the Velma of it all, it was always going to get made. I accept that. Some version of HBO and some version of Velma was going to get made. Wasn't originally pitched as an original idea by Mindy Kaling and Charlie Grandy about Velma. I don't know, maybe. Mindy definitely represents a very specific kind of nerd in a very specific moment of time. She's very pop culture literate. She's very gossip and like the social strata, the Beverly Hills 90210. If that's even too dated of a reference. I don't know. She's a specific kind of nerd, and I think we got a little bit of that on The Office when she was on The Office, a show that she wrote for. I think we really got a lot more of that on the Mindy Project, which when the pilot came out, I read it. I thought it was quite good. I thought it was very much her. I was very looking forward to it. I watched about half of the first season and realized that it wasn't talking to me, it wasn't about me, and I didn't connect with the material, but it had how many seasons? 6 seasons or whatever, so obviously I lost the argument. It seems like Velma is a continuation of the Mindy Project in every way that you can really consider. It just happens to have the facade, a word I can't pronounce, of Scooby Doo on top of it. It looks like the animated version of the Mindy Project. That's just how I feel. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that just seems to be the vibe of what we're dealing with. Um, have I caveated myself enough? Yeah. What else do I want to say before I really get into it? The cast is absolutely loaded. Mindy Kaling again, comedy superstar. Glenn Howerton. If you've never heard of him, which I don't think that's possible in the English language, if you're watching this show, Always Sunny in Philadelphia, AP Bio, a failed That 80s Show pilot. Sam Richardson, I think, has a bunch of Emmys for, I assume, Veep. The guy is the guy is a total pro, absolutely fantastic. Constance Wu from everything. Sarah You Blue, don't know. Melissa Fumero from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Jane Lynch from everything and Glee. Russell Peters from himself. Wanda Sykes is Wanda Sykes. Carl Anthony Towns, I'm not cool enough. Okay, these are people I don't actually know. Nicole Byer I do know. And Fortune, I know Fortune. Oh, very cool. So there is a very strong Veep. Did Charlie Grandy write for Veep? I don't. Let me look. There's a very high chance Charlie Grandy wrote for Veep. Apparently, I don't know. Anyway, neither here nor there. It's a huge loaded cast, and especially the main principal actors are comedy actors. And I think with the exception of like Constance Wu, all of them have been writers too. Glenn Howerton, I believe he's the co-creator of Always Sunny, but he writes Always Sunny with the rest of those guys. Mindy Kaling, again, The Office, The Mindy Project, Sam Richardson, Shermadon, is that what it's called? The musical thing that Cecily Strong is doing. I think they're on that together. But he's been on a ton of stuff. Yeah, so it's not just voice talent. It's incredibly recognizable, incredibly successful, incredibly famous comedians who have a background in writing, which is foreshadowing for what I want to actually talk about. Anyway, this show had everything going for it, the best I could figure. And the level of quality of the animation seems to indicate to me, not knowing anything about the actual financials of this show, seems like it's well paid. Everybody's well fed. I just want to point out that the IMDb rating is 1.5 out of 10 for 17,000 views. That means a lot of people voted 1 star out of 10, and then a bunch of people voted more than 1 star out of 10, but the majority seems to have voted 1 star out of 10. That's incredible. You don't see that often. So it doesn't help that it's on HBO, and so the clientele that HBO services will vote and will have opinions. I'd be lying if this was on a different network. I don't know if I would be doing this because there's kind of no point. But HBO seems to have some sort of interest in the audience interaction, ignoring what's been happening recently. I think I have to admit that when I was talking about doing this last night, my writer buddy told me straight up, he's like, this show is out, and yet HBO seems to be wanting to cancel everything, especially if it's a cartoon, and this show came out. Yeah, he makes a very strong point, having watched the first 2 episodes myself, because I wouldn't have done that otherwise. Oh my God, he's like, that's wild. The way this show is going, I can't see how it's not going to get canceled, but it got a season made, so that has to count for something, right? Anyway, so I guess with all that out of the way, let's try to get into it. Let's try to see if we can see what's actually going on with this show. Because I'm very much of the opinion everything is broken until it's fixed. The Matrix, I think the reason the first Matrix was such a success is those siblings were pitching that for like a decade and constantly revising it, constantly adjusting it, constantly, tuning it. And then they got sort of the free parking pass for their other stuff, and they just didn't do that. And that's my argument for why the Matrix sequels are so horrible, is because they had 10 years to figure it out, and then they had 18 months to make 2 movies. I wasn't there. I don't know. I was a child for that entire period of my life, so who knows? But that's my theory: is given enough time, given enough attention, given enough patience, given enough being honest with yourself about the writing, I think you can make anything work. I fear this is going to be an example of not enough tension or not enough time or just not enough giving a shit. So, you know, before I get the last thing I want to say before I get into it, my experience of watching the show was the experience of watching a radio show, which is to say I could have turned off the screen and just listened to it and would have been the exact same experience. Even the sort of her having a heart attack because she sees demons, unless she gets kissed or somebody makes jokes because she doesn't understand chemistry sometimes. That's a little bit of me editorializing, but it's not. Even that stuff, it plays out like a radio show. That's a risk that I think some shows make. I think that's more of a risk for animated shows because you don't typically have the whole cast in the same room the whole time because it doesn't make sense. It plays out like a radio show. If it was a radio show, I would have called it boring and not interesting. But because it's an animated show with a very interesting, aggressive animation style, it seems like they're two different things and they're not interested in being compatible with each other. Yeah, so let's get into it. Let's jump right into the rating. Actually, let me walk you through the rest of the board real quick. So let's jump in. Top left side of the board, we have the Scooby of it all. So the idea that it's a Scooby-Doo show, and then that column that I haven't filled out is what's different, or the Velma of it all. So we know about Scoob, we know about the gang, we know about solving mysteries. There's a dog involved. I don't know if that's a secret. The Mystery Machine van, pop culture references, and the Us versus the World, which I don't know if you can see. Hold on. I can zoom it in. There we go. Us versus the World. That's the whole thing. It was an ensemble, and it was an ensemble about learning and growing and cooperating and being friends and being different and celebrating your differences. Obviously, it was the 1950s and 60s, and so they were all very white. They're very Aryan. I'm glad that's not a thing anymore, but it is what it is. He's blonde-haired, blue-eyed, where an ascot was Fred. The fact that they kept that in the new version, I think, is one of the stronger choices that they made, because it is just an endless joke, an endless opportunity to mine for jokes, because Fred is, by most standards today, an abomination of a character. How that was handled, it was a lot of small peen jokes, and sure, I'm a big, there's nothing off limits, and if the guy's got a small peen and it keeps coming up, it keeps coming up. But the everything else about it, Glenn Howerton has made it a robust, very similar character in Always Sunny, and somehow that didn't make it into this show, and I don't understand why, considering Glenn Howerton seems to really heavily curate his Dennis character in Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Leads me to believe he was not part of the writing process at all. He was brought in to act. So anyway, going on, the why the Scooby-Doo, the why this adaptation, who is this for, and then sort of the strengths, which we can get into later. It's not really important. And let's get back over to the chart that I really want to address first, which is the creative writer. If I was reading this script and I was gonna have to send it up the line because of reasons, the producer wanted me to pull the script out of the pile because it's a Mindy Kaling project and Charlie Grandy. This is how I would treat it. Concept, strength of concept. Let's just go get right into it. Strength of concept is it's a new, fresh take on Velma, and it's no longer an ensemble about solving mysteries. It's much more about Velma's high school days. She has a whole new set of affectations, including the fact that she's, I believe, of Indian descent because it's Mindy Kaling. She's kind of chubby because it's Mindy Kaling, and she's a nerd, but at every point she makes a point to say that she's a nerd. But then, other than the fact that she reads, I don't necessarily think that. But hey, the definition of nerd is an amorphous thing, just like the definition of sexuality, I guess. So that's fine. Strength of concept. I don't know. Ignoring the fact that it's an adaptation already, let's give it a 3 out of 5 because it's a show. It's not incomprehensible. It's a thing. But let's go ahead and do that. So but it's an adaptation, and the limits of the adaptation are limited by the fact that they're adapting something. Um, Again, it's not the dice roll of a new idea, but it is very much a dice roll on whether or not you're going to be able to convert fans of the original idea who, and if you're arguing that the shows that they're referencing started in the 60s are old and possibly dead now, but if you want a puppet named Scooby-Doo, which was my generation, 30s to 40s. So anyway, originality. Again, it's an intellectual property. So the originality is going to have to be what separates itself from the show itself. Sure, visually incredibly original. The fact that I've seen the mini project, it seems like the mini project, except they're wearing Scooby-Doo clothes. So I'm going to give it a cautionary 3. And this is all out of 5. I don't know if you can see my little handwriting. Commercial viability. Yeah, it's a slam dunk. It's a Scooby-Doo property. Assuming grown-ups want to watch cartoons, which is a reference that happens over and over again in the show in a way that makes me want to nosebleed, because we've proven through Rick and Morty and I guess The Simpsons, but I'd say Rick and Morty, adults will watch cartoons if they're well written, if they make sense, if they speak to the adults. And so commercial viability, I'd say it's a 4. It would have scored higher if people hadn't have seen the trailer and realized the tone, which is what's coming up in a minute. Cinematic potential, that's where it splits, because again, it looks incredible, but it plays out like a radio show where there's no need to actually look at the screen. So cinematic potential, I'm going to give it a 2. Which makes me feel bad for all the animators and visual artists involved, but clearly they weren't the ones making the decisions, which is the thing I want to get into later too, because unlike live action, where as soon as the actors have recorded their performances, it goes into editorial, and it's a completely different team that usually just has producers, directors, and then the editorial staff. When you're making a cartoon, everybody's involved with everything. The director, the producer, all those people are constantly involved with editorial, because editorial has to make these visual assets. And so these poor animators have to watch this show 1,000 times before they're done animating it. And the fact that nobody was able to say, hey, I don't think this is going to work, that's a concern for me. So anyway, quality of lead roles. It's the same reason I like Freddie Prinze and his wife, whose name escapes me now, for the live action versions that I watched. They're fun lead roles. The idea is you get to dip into the history and the role of Freddy and Velma and Shaggy, who's now a different character. But it's also these are heavy hitters that they basically just found the top of their game for every role, and they put them in. So quality of lead roles, I'd say 4, because again, it's intellectual property, so it's not like Sam Richardson is going to break the mold by his Shaggy character, even though technically he's not Shaggy anymore. All right, on the right side of the column, let me just see, in case I'm getting spammed. I am not. Okay. Emotional resonance. This is going to be very important, because without emotional resonance, people don't connect to the material. Experience-wise, emotional resonance 0 or 1 for me. But for the sake of enough people had to shake hands and say yes and pay money for this to get made, 2. Because it's not like a Michael Moore documentary where it seems absolutely convinced that it needs to provoke anybody that would condescend to watch it. It doesn't seem like that, but it just seems like I'm not connecting to it, and I haven't yet to find a person who has. And again, IMDb rating 1 out of 5 out of 10. And that's IMDb. And to be clear, IMDb, I don't trust IMDb. IMDb famously, with the Rings of Power, hid because they're owned by Amazon. That's all. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Anyway, thematic resonance. The themes in this story: growing up, being a nerd, being a nerdy woman of color, all that kind of stuff. Very useful, but the way it was delivered, I don't know. It seems like it's just the way I understood it. Velma seems utterly alone in the world, which I could editorialize on as a person who very much in that period of my life felt very alone in the world. But then there seems to be no actual meaningful connection with anyone either. So thematic resonance, what is all this about? I don't know because there's no connection. So I'm going to give it a 2 because if I gave it a 1, I feel like that would be mean. Uniqueness and development of world. And again, this is the trap when you're adapting stuff. You either stay to the adaptation or you cut against it and call attention to all the things you've cut against it. Obviously, this is Minnie Kaling's project. She cut against it every place she possibly could. Apparently, Daphne is Asian with red hair. I didn't put that together, but I didn't look too hard at the animation. But fine, sure. It was Constance Wu, so I assumed she was Asian anyway. But Velma's Indian. The guy who plays Shaggy is black, played by Sam. Norville is black, played by Sam Richardson. Freddie is white, which makes sense. Glenn Howerton is a blonde-haired, blue-eyed guy, so it makes sense. Yeah, but as far as the development of the world, I don't know, because you're always it's the risk you take when you're adapting an intellectual property is it's always going to be compared to other versions of that intellectual property. And there's been a pantheon of Scooby-Doo, mostly for kids, basically exclusively for kids, but it's always going to be compared to that. And so even though this world is technically unique, and especially the fact that she hallucinates and it seems to want to try to kill her every time she tries to solve a mystery, that's her whole obstacle is if she tries to solve a mystery, the ghosts try to give her a heart attack. And that seems to be a real thing. That is not just in her head because they talk about it in real time, even though she's the only one that sees the ghosts. Undercooked. I'd say undercooked. I know I could probably say that about the whole thing, but uniqueness and development in the world, undercooked. The risk when you go really high concept, and it's really easy to do that when you're doing a cartoon, is you spend all your time trying to explain the world. I find the best shows don't need to explain anything. Rick and Morty explains almost too little in a lot of moments. Anyway, so tone of the show. I think tone is probably the make or break of everything that I would. If I'm reading something and everything else works but the tone is broken, I'm very confident to give that to somebody and say, hey, it's firing on all cylinders except for the tone, which requires a rewrite, which depending on who I'm handing it to would mean great. We'll develop it together. If I'm handing it to a manager or a young agent or a junior agent, great. We'll develop it. We'll fix the tone. We'll fix the jokes, blah, 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 bing, bang, boom. On the other hand, if it's like a producer who's trying to get something greenlit and I say everything works with the tone, the producer's going to be like, great. So it's going to be what, minimum 1 to 4 rewrites? Absolutely not. Walk them. And it is what it is. Tone's tricky. Tone, I don't think you ever get right on the first try. I just don't. It comes in the rewrite because especially in comedy, it's about the nuances and the subtleties and the sort of the arena you've put yourself in that you're going to work in. And in this case, the tone I found to be, I don't know, how do I say this? Mean-spirited. Self-absorbed, which is not a deal breaker. Always Sunny is built around self-absorbed. Mean-spirited. So I'd say tone is a 2. It's consistent, which is usually what I find to be the problem with stuff, is an inconsistent tone, especially with comedy, because you get attracted to jokes, and so you don't want to cut certain jokes that are not compatible with the tone of what you're trying to do. That's usually the case. The tone seems pretty consistent in this show. It just seems like it's trying to give me a migraine. It just seems like it's trying to hurt my feelings. Not me, delicate white snowflake, but me as in a person trying to connect with the material. Yeah. And X Factor. It's Scooby-Doo plus adult themes plus the greatest voice acting cast of a generation. The X Factor is 5 out of 5. It just is what it is. It got made because all these people somehow said yes. Yeah. So anyway, that's the rubric. And if you look at it, it didn't score good. I think everything basically has to be a 5 for it to be worthy of a green light, worthy of getting produced. That's just how I'm at. I'm coming from the world of the script has to be undeniable. Otherwise, what are we all doing here? there's an example of a terrible show, you throw a rock. But what I'm saying is, if you want a show to have a chance, if you want to throw a show to really connect with the audiences, your first chance is with the script, because that's the high watermark of the production. So if the script is a 10 out of 10, production has the capacity to bring it up to a 10 out of 10. And then in post, again, in this case, it's an animated show, so that is production. But if the script is a 2, good luck getting the animation and the quality of the show after it was written above a 2. I saw an interview the other day where Bryan Cranston talks about how when he reads a character and the character is a 6, he knows that he may be able to make that character a 7. But if the character is a 2, his best chance is a 3. And I think that's a really good way of looking at it. That's kind of a little bit more accommodating, because I consider, again, the script to be the limiting bar. But he makes a very good point. He's Bryan Cranston. Who am I to argue? Yeah. So what a mess of a score, I gotta say. At what point am I just picking on somebody who they're not going to hear me? But yeah, if I saw 2 for cinematic potential, 2 for tone, 2 for thematic resonance, 2 for emotional resonance. Okay, so here's where I'm at with plot versus character, or plot versus emotion. Characters drive the plot through their emotions, and so something has to happen to a character to have them have an emotional reaction, and that will make them make choices which will drive the plot forward. So if there is no emotional resonance, if the characters cannot do something emotionally, and therefore it does not affect the audience emotionally, there's no connection there, even if the characters appear to be acting emotionally. If it doesn't affect the audience, something is missing, the plot falls apart too. So usually it's the other way around. Usually the plot is watertight and there's no emotional character reactions, and therefore there's no connection there. But this is literally just, there's no connection at all. So, and thematic resonance, this show on paper seems like a freaking Yahtzee. It just does. It's got Mindy Kaling, Sam Richardson, Constance Wu. It's got Mindy Kaling's point of view, Mindy Kaling's very pop culture referencey point of view. It seems absolutely impossible to fail, and yet somehow it is the experience of putting sharp needles into the side of your face. It is what it is. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know how much more we're going to be able to learn from the chart, other than to say it's weak, and the only reason it got made is because HBO wanted to make a Scooby-Doo, and Mindy Kaling was available and was able to get a bunch of huge comedy stars to lend their voices. I'm not even sure I'd be able to recognize Glenn Howerton's voice in a comedy if I didn't know what it was, like in a cartoon. I don't know. Mindy 100%, Sam Richardson 100%, Constance Wu 100%. Some of these others definitely, but there's also an entire world of voice actors that I feel like are a little bit more recognizable than those people. So the fact that the show got made is off of the gigantic cast. But they're throwing away part of the best part of casting such a gigantic cast like this. Is these are all proven, celebrated monsters of their abilities, of their career. Sam Richardson is just a Jedi when it comes to physical comedy and the subtleties. The character he played on Veep, it was incredible. You could do it with the sound off and it would still be just as funny, because he's so good at the subtleties and matching his character and his mannerisms to the tone of what that show was. You lose that in the cartoon, and you can sort of build it back with the animation style, but you also can't. So anyway, moving on. Let's look at some other stuff. Let's look at the Scooby of it all. I think that's where we need to start. So now that I've ranted, and it looks like I'm mad, but I promise you I'm just frustrated that I had to sit through both of those episodes. Let's look through the Scooby of it all. Let me see if I can get this to fit. There we go. Okay, far left. The Scooby-Doo of it all. You have the gang. Awesome. Big fan. They're all basically archetypes because they've been around for so long, but I think the reason it worked then and the reason it basically works now is they're all very different. You don't have 2 Shaggys, you don't have 2 Freds, you don't have 2 Velmas, you don't have 2 Daphnes. They're all they're all unique. And in the 1960s version, that means they all had different colored hair and they were all a different stereotype in high school. In 2023, it's much more nuanced, it's much more amorphous because people are unique. You know, in the same way the old Scooby-Doo was a gross oversimplification of people's roles in society, the new Scooby-Doo has an opportunity to really call to attention the oversimplification and the fact that a jock can also be a nerd, or the fact that a jock may not even be a thing anymore. Yeah, so anyway, the Scooby-Doo of it all, we have the gang. Yeah, totally agree. I think that's why it worked. It's the ensemble, and so you can connect with whatever character you need to connect to. A lot of people connected with Shaggy and Scooby because Scooby was just the friendly dog and Shaggy was constantly afraid of everything. It's strongly implied that Shaggy was high through the entire thing, and that's definitely the universe that I want to live in because it makes sense to me, because otherwise they're all just sort of wandering around and breaking into stuff and just kind of be jerk kids that don't have anything in common, whereas Shaggy and Scooby had actual proper, like, deep emotional lives that is affected by the jeopardy of what they're in. And if you have people that are not affected by the jeopardy of what they're in, what are we all doing here? Anyway, we have the gang, we have solving mysteries. Again, they're out there solving mysteries from a kid's cartoon perspective. It's a way to work through stuff. It's a way to face your fears. It's a way to take off the mask and go, this is only scary until you realize that it's just people being weird. That was a very useful lesson for me. We have the dog, Scooby-Doo. He will not be attending this new show, it seems. I don't know. I've only seen 2 episodes. I can't see myself seeing a third, honestly. But even if he shows up in episode 3, too late. Come on, the dog. He's great. He's the foil. He's the everybody interacts with Scooby so as to, he says stuff we can't do. He does stuff we're not allowed to do. You need that character. I don't know who that character is in Velma. I think it's Sam Richardson's character, is my best guess, which is, his name is Norval. I'm going to remember that. I promise at some point I'm going to remember the word Norval. I think that's who the foil is, the bouncing off guy, because he's not a straight, he plays it straight, but he's not straight. And Minnie's definitely, man, I'm all over the place. Velma's character is not the straight man, and that's fine. I don't mind that the main character is not the straight person in the story. I don't mind. But I've yet to see any of the straight characters. So, because you need a goofy character to play off with the straight character. And anyway, Mystery Machine, the van. It's gone. I guess the new Mystery Machine is Norval's car, but it's gone. Pop culture references. This was very much a part of the show. They met the Beach Boys. They met other references I can't think of at the moment, but they had topical people come in and do voice acting and all kind of stuff. It was about that. It was about the sort of the goofy crossover. That was a fun part of the show. It's definitely lost on my generation because at 11 I had a very vague understanding of who the Beach Boys were, and boy did I not care, but that's fine. And then the last thing is the us versus the world of it all. Bottom left corner. It's us versus the world. That's the whole thing. It's we're a family. We're a team. Leave nobody behind. This is how we do it. All those cliches. That whole thing. And then let's talk about the new version. So instead of the gang in Velma, it's herself, the character Velma. There's something interesting there. I'm not gonna lie. The idea that Velma could be herself having this entire fantastical journey, I got no problem with that. The way it was delivered, I have a problem with, but that's fine. The solving mysteries of it, she's still solving mysteries, but I put a big old asterisk next to it because she's not really solving mysteries the way Scooby-Doo in basically every version has solved mysteries. She's got like the one big mystery, which is what happened to her mom because her mom went missing. Which is in the second episode actually played for a joke, which I think undercut any of the building that they were actually attempting. She's not really solving mysteries. She's supposed to be solving mysteries, but she's solving mysteries the way a person who wanders through an episode and happens to get to a conclusion. I don't see any setups. I don't see any payoffs. I don't see any finding clues. I don't see any red herrings. The genre is right for parody for sure, because there's all these things. That's why Glass Onion. That's why even the Death on the Nile, those movies are killing it right now because for some reason people love true crime, and the thing right next to true crime is mysteries. And so The fact that this show seemed aggressively not interested in actually solving mysteries and just sort of just making jokes, I was like, then why make it Scooby? Anyway, moving on. There's no dog. Um, yeah, it's about Velma, so they changed the name, which the slam dunk would have been it's still called Scooby Doo and there's no dog, but there's no dog. So even if the dog shows up in episode 3, it's too late. It's too late. So I don't understand the world of Scooby Doo without Scooby Doo, because Scooby Doo was such an integral part of the story. He was also the mascot. He was also an opportunity for characters who don't interact with other people to interact with Scooby-Doo, specifically Shaggy. Shaggy seems to not interact with almost anybody traditionally, but he interacts with Scooby because they're on the same team, they're on the same side. There's no dog. I don't care that Scooby is not Velma's dog. I don't care. He's not in the story. So anyway, Mystery Machine, no Mystery Machine. So this actually gets mentioned, I believe, in the second episode that Freddy has the I believe it was called a kidnap van. I forget the reference. I don't. You know what I'm saying? He has the creepy van. Sure. And in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, that was, I mean, the hippie kids would pile into a van. Van life is still a thing. Van life may actually be more of a thing now than it's ever been. And so there's an adaptation of Scooby-Doo where they're all van life hippies driving across country, Instagramming themselves. That's an interesting show. I don't understand why that show didn't get made, especially in the tone of Mindy Kaling stuff, other than the fact that I have a strong feeling that Mindy Kaling doesn't like the idea of camping in general, which is fine. I don't either, but yeah, van life, come on. Pop culture references, yes, pop culture references, and this may be what sold the show, honestly. Is Mindy Kaling is just a pop culture references machine. It's a very specific kind. It's the Sex and City, not, I can't think of another reference, honestly. Rick and Morty, I guess. That's too young, probably. Mindy Kaling is a pop culture references machine. That's basically why she had a job on The Office. That's what the Mindy Project was. Yeah, that may be, other than the ensemble that she put together, that may be why she got the show made, honestly, is because she has a proven track record of being just an absolute just monster with pop culture references. It's not my brand of pop culture references, but that's fine. I don't have a problem with that. As long as I'm engaged, it doesn't matter. I don't really understand the nuances of Miranda versus, I don't know. I know Mr. Big is the guy. I don't know. Anyway, and then Us versus the World, we have Velma versus the World, which I think is the first big misstep of this whole thing. Is Scooby-Doo traditionally is an ensemble because you want to be able to see yourself in one of the characters, or obviously most of the characters, but it's an ensemble and it's celebrating the differences. It's the us versus the world. It's the, if we work together, even if we don't agree how everybody does it, or if we don't agree how the choices are made, as long as we work together and we fulfill our role and we cooperate and we listen and we do all that kind of stuff, mission accomplished. And this one definitely seems like Velma versus the world. It doesn't seem like anybody, at least from her point of view, seems like on her side. Definitely Norville is very much on her side. He is in love with her. He's obsessed with her, blah, blah, blah. She plays it off as a joke. Sure, for the sake of the girl with 20 guy friends, that's fine. It actually may be more of a stereotype, and maybe Mindy could have cut against that, honestly, but I don't have a problem with that. The problem is nobody seems on Mindy's, or on Velma's side. I'm just going to keep saying Mindy. Her dad doesn't seem on Velma's side. Nobody at work or at school seems on Velma's side. Daphne, they have a thing. I won't spoil episode 2, but obviously if you're watching this, you're probably not going to watch the show anyway. Daphne and her have a weird, contentious relationship that obviously goes the way of One Tree Hill, Dawson's Creek, or the Vampire Diaries, because how could it not? But nobody's inherently on Velma's side. Buffy had a team. Buffy the Vampire Slayer had an ensemble of people that were on her side. Even if she didn't agree with them, even if she fought with them, they would show up. Norville probably, but the way she treats Norville, I think he's going to figure it out at some point and just move on with his life, because life's too short. That's just how it seems. And so just looking at this road, the incompatibility is just, I don't know. I think there's no problem with picking and choosing what you want to save from the original intellectual property versus what you want to ditch, what you want to change, what you want to parody, what you want to turn on its ear, all that kind of stuff. I have no problem with that. The ones that stand out to me are the no dog of it all, no Scooby-Doo of it all, and the Velma versus everybody of it all. Because, yeah, you know, I don't know. Anyway, moving on. Uh, let's talk about this yellow row in the middle here. Um, why Scooby-Doo versus an original idea? The short answer is HBO wanted to make a Scooby-Doo, or Mindy Kaling pitched an original Scooby-Doo, or Chris Grandy pitched an original Scooby-Doo, and it evolved into Mindy's show. That's the why of it all. Would it have been an easier sell than an original idea? Most definitely, because even if it's inherently incompatible with the audience it's trying to speak to, which I would argue this show is, you can still lie to yourself and an executive and say, somebody, even if the show sucks, somebody might get confused enough to go, oh, this is Scooby-Doo, and watch it, and maybe they'll like it, maybe they'll keep watching it. You know, bad take for sure. Obviously, you want to go, Scooby-Doo, people love Scooby-Doo. If we put it out and it's good, people will go, oh man, this is Scooby-Doo. I will watch it. I will love it. Mission accomplished. And then we can make more seasons of it. That's the ideal. Why this show versus an original idea? It was going to happen. It was going to happen. I hate that that's a thing, but it is a thing. You know, intellectual property is only going to continue being a thing. Disney feels some kind of way about it, which I think is working us against ourselves, honestly. But short of that, intellectual property is a thing. It will continue to be a thing. It is technically a safer bet than something original, because something original is, by its own definition, untested. I still love original ideas more. I just do, because you have it's like a fresh birthed baby. You have all the potential in the world. You don't know what that baby's going to grow up to be. Sometimes the baby grows up to be an asshole. So, but you know, sometimes the baby grows up to be a president that ends an embattled war in the Eastern Bloc of you know, Europe, where the war shouldn't have happened in the first place. You don't know. You don't know until the baby grows up. So, why this adaptation? It's the same answer as why Scooby-Doo. Mindy Kaling / Charlie Grandy got involved. It sucks. It's cynical, but that is what it is. If Mindy Kaling didn't say yes, and or Glenn Howerton or Sam Richardson, whoever got on second, if they didn't say yes, everybody else wouldn't have said yes. That's how it works. That's how packaging works. Scarlett Johansson got in big trouble a few years ago when she was trying to say this in the context of, she was supposed to be playing an Asian character in whatever that anime was, but she wasn't wrong inherently. She was wrong for trying to address it, because there was no point, because she's screwed. She already said yes, she's screwed, but she wasn't wrong when she basically said, if I don't say yes to this movie doesn't get made, which is true, which is a reflection on the cynicism of Hollywood. It's really not a reflection on Scarlett Johansson's bad choosing abilities, other than she shouldn't have brought it up. Same for this. This adaptation was going to get made as soon as Mindy said yes, or as soon as Charlie Grandy sold it. It is what it is. Who is this for? Let's try to address that, because I'm not so sure. Because in the simplest way, the whole point of intellectual property, the whole point of taking an idea that's already happened and changing it or redoing it somehow, is making it for somebody. Because at the end of the day, any audience is better than no audience. Obviously, Marvel Phase 1 or Phase 2 is the ultimate example of, you know, servicing the audience, but also adding new whatever to the new sauce, whatever. Anyway, who's this for? Let's try to talk about who's this for. Oh man. There we go. First, who's this for? Adults. It's an adult cartoon, which is a very specific kind of cartoon, but I don't disagree. Who's this for? Adults. It's definitely got an adult tone. It's got Mindy Kaling's tone. She's a grown up. She's a grown person, even though the joke is she's a woman child. Who's this for? It's for adults. Big minus that it's a cartoon, because you can name all the successful adult cartoons. I think the fact that it was set up at HBO gives it a better shot than most, because that's the same universe as Rick and Morty. That's the same universe as Simpsons, kind of. So yeah. But who's this for? Adults, I guess. Given the fact that it's you know, a high school drama comedy. I don't understand why it's for adults, but that's fine. I watched Big Mouth. I've watched, you know, I'll still watch stories about high school, even though I'm decades out of it. Who's this for? Nerds. But that really calls on the question, what defines a nerd? Because Mindy Kaling's definition of a nerd seems absolutely specific, but also different than a lot of nerds. Having said that, whatever you want to call a nerd, I think that's totally fine. If you call somebody who does this a nerd, then I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's perfectly fine. It seems like Mindy Kaling's definition of a nerd is very specific, but her character, and I guess Mindy, which was kind of my complaint about the Mindy project too, was every time she talked about being a nerd, she sort of implied that she was the every nerd, but she's not. She's a very specific kind of nerd. That's why she's successful. That's why people like her. That's why she's so relatable, is because she's a very specific kind of nerd that traditionally hasn't been seen. She's a girl. She's a girl of color. She's a pop culture nerd. She's not a math prodigy. She's not a scientist. She's a nerdy girl who had a really awkward, childhood and is now a grown woman who's still dealing with the ramifications of her awkward, childhood. By that definition, yes, she's a nerd. By that definition, I'm a nerd. By that definition, a lot of people are nerds. The problem I have is she seems so proud of herself for being a nerd, but if I were to compare her nerd experience to a nerd experience I've experienced, there is basically no overlap other than she likes to read, and the nerd stereotype is nerds like to read. I consider myself a nerd, and I'm basically illiterate. If I haven't said this on this podcast yet or live show yet, I think I have already. Probably. Anyway, moving on. Who's this for? Stoners. And this is especially weird because it's like Rick and Morty, I feel like is a perfect stoner show. It has the sort of it speaks to stoners. It has the kind of stoner jokes. It's very broy. It happens to be quite well written, which is why Rick and Morty has been so successful, let's be honest. But it never goes, oh man, let's celebrate being stoners. It's not like that. I mean, Rick is obviously a horrible alcoholic and kind of belligerent and very much a bad person, but he's not a stoner. He's not going, you can only watch this if you care about doing drugs. I feel like this character, Velma, in this story has sort of pulled the rubber band the other direction, where it keeps making jokes about stoners. It keeps making jokes about how this is going to be the next stoner show because that's who watches adult cartoons, like that whole thing. But then the Velma's character specifically is sober, is a teetotaler, doesn't do drugs, all this kind of stuff. I mean, Daphne kind of does all of it, which is kind of the joke. But my point is, the kind of nerd that Velma's character represents, which I would argue is Mindy Kaling's character specifically, is a straight edge, is a clean person, is not a stoner. And so I feel like there's a proper incompatibility there, in that if you're making a stoner show for stoners, just because you say, hey, look, all the stoners are going to like this because it's a cartoon, also still has to have stuff that stoners care about. And honestly, interacting with stoners on a regular basis, they care about the same stuff everybody else cares about. They just have a little bit more patience for cartoons. I don't think there's a huge difference there. They're like Dan Harmon of Rick and Morty fame writes sitcoms, writes cartoons, writes Dungeons and Dragons style shows. Like it's not stoner content. It just happens to be one of his shows as a cartoon. And so the sort of the misrepresentation or the misunderstanding of what stoner culture is, and the fact that Mindy Kaling's character Velma seems convinced that the show needs to constantly reference stoners, although Velma's character itself has contempt for stoners, like dislikes them. It comes off very, very condescending, very, very mistranslated, very hard to deal with, because at the risk of defending stoners for a second, people make fun of them for being stoners. Stoners make fun of other stoners for being stoners. But they're going to like what they like. People like what they like no matter whether they do drugs or whether they're sober or whether that was never been part of their thing and they've only done, private school and had a good, clean life full of eating vegetables and all that kind of stuff. People are going to like what they like. The drug aspect of it is such a small part of the nuances. Yeah, I feel like I went too far with that. Anyway, last one, Mindy. Who is this adaptation for? Mindy. Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. I don't see how it's not. It just basically seems like if the Mindy Project did a cartoon that was called Velma. It it's a great. Oh, excuse me, I gotta build up. I drank too much tea. Um, it feels like the Mindy Project. It's aggressively Mindy Kaling's voice, but Mindy Kaling's voice just doesn't seem compatible with the material they're trying to push because they're trying to push a goofy stoner, you know, strong point of view, all this kind of stuff, which is half Mindy, but it's also it comes off as inherently inaccurate or misrepresented or just a misunderstanding because they're trying to squish Mindy's giant personality into a character that is 3/5 Mindy, 2/5 Velma from Scooby Doo, a character that was invented in the late 1950s, early 1960s. It yeah, it seems uncooked. It seems undercooked. That's kind of where I'm getting with that. So let's go to the next row. At the risk of losing my voice and you know, and somebody calling me out on my bad takes. Um, and to be clear, these are all just my take. I don't see right or wrong in any of this. I just see this is how I would look at it, this is how I would think about it. And hopefully there's a solution to this. But honestly, we're far enough in now. I think I can probably just say I think it's the tone and the quality of the jokes and just the low quality of the writing and the low quality of the jokes specifically. This show is dead in the water. It just is. Moving on, let's try to find other things. But I honestly think it's the writing. I think it's just an undercooked show. I think that at some point, whoever was at the helm of this show lost interest in this show, and it just kept going. And this is the result because if you love something, you're not going to allow it to be this caustic, this ineffectual, this limp. It's a limp show. Anyway, moving on. Weaknesses of the show. Let's see if I have my cards here. Yeah, here we go. There we go. Okay. So weaknesses of the show. The push-pull of the IP. And what I mean by that is where do you draw the line whether you're going to stay true to the original version of are they referencing the 1960s version? Are they referencing a pup named Scooby-Doo? Are they referencing the TV shows since then, of which there's been like 20? Are they referencing the movies? I don't know. But it does seem like the Velma character just doesn't seem compatible with the template that is set out for her in that it's a Scooby-Doo universe. Yeah. Another weakness. The writing. And this is where I kind of ranted already, but I honestly believe that given enough time, given enough patience, given enough care, given enough listening, given enough feedback, given enough confidence and loving of the material, you can get the writing to work. And once the writing works, everything kind of falls into place. In the case of animation, yeah, you can't do anything without the writing. You have to have the writing. You can't just start. The show is woefully underwritten, and the jokes are just incompatible with the story they're trying to tell, which is so strange. The whole like her hallucinating, having heart attacks thing feels so last minute tacked on that it was either last minute tacked on or it was removed and written out, and then they added it back in somehow. I don't know. I wasn't there. I wasn't in the writer's room. Obviously, I mean, look at me. I look like Glenn Howerton's ghost. The writing is not good. The writing is not good, and at the risk of criticizing people who don't deserve the criticism, I have no problem with the animators. I have no problem with the director, honestly, probably, unless the director was involved in the writing of this. It's the writing. It's just the jokes don't land because the jokes seem ineffectual and facing the wrong way, and the rest of the writing doesn't make sense. And how they got this far in the process with this quality of scripting, it was always going to get made, I guess, is the only answer. Let's talk about tone. Weakness. The tone is hilariously inconsistent, and part of that is it's the Mindy Kaling show. And so whatever Mindy Kaling does is the best. and that's fine. That's what worked about the Mindy Project. It's what worked about her character and her role on The Office. But when you're trying to tell a character in an intellectual property, you run the risk of just making it about yourself. And honestly, I don't know what step of the process made this show fall apart. And so I don't actually begrudge Mindy Kaling or the writing that was Mindy Kaling in the show, because I don't know whether that came last or whether that came first. But the tone of this show is just it's just convinced it's going to poke you in the eye. And I don't, I'll watch a difficult show. I sat through Chernobyl. I sat through that show last night, The Last of Us, which was absolutely fantastic. I'm so excited. I was so afraid another video game show was going to fall apart. The tone of this Velma show is so mean spirited that it feels like, if it feels like it's got a vendetta against white guys, for one, which, sure, no problem. If Glenn Howerton's character Freddy needs to fall on his sword or his tiny dick in the case of the show every single moment, I have no problem with that. But that means the main character, the characters, even if they're unlikable, they still have to have some sort of compelling story to happen to them. They have to make emotional choices in order to drive the story forward, and that's not happening. It's just, you get to a plot point, you get to a throwaway joke that has no consequence on anything, and then time moves on. Yeah. So, also there's a lot of white male stoners. Just saying, but I'm not going to argue that. I'm not going to argue that that's what the show should have been meant for, because clearly that was never going to be the case. And honestly, I think that's a terrible idea to begin with. Please, HBO, don't ever do that. However, you can't condescend to everybody and then expect everybody to still like you. Insult comics being the exception, I guess. So I guess if her character was, instead of an investigator or instead of a mystery solver, her plan was going to be an insult comic, I might actually be on board. I'm actually kind of falling in love with that idea as I say it, because then her prickliness makes sense. Her willingness to go for the joke rather than actually tell a compelling story that is compatible with what it's trying to do, that makes sense. Because if there's one thing about, if you've ever spent time with stand-up comedians, especially if there's multiple of them in the same room, all they will do is try to out-joke each other. When you're a comedian, it's fun/stressful. When you're an audience member, it's the worst. That's kind of the vibe I'm getting from the show now that I think about it. It just seems like 5 stand-up comedians who just came off of a bad set that night. All of them had a horrible crowd, and they came in, and now they're trying to outdo each other, because if you don't have the best joke, what are you doing here? That's I don't know. That's a love letter to stand-up comedy, but it's also, I feel like it's very relevant here. Who is this writing meant to address is the real question of the show. Anyway, another weakness, the packaging, the package. And I'm in referencing to the radio show of it all, which is to say, you could turn off the TV and just listen to the dialogue, and it's the same show. It might actually be better, honestly, because things that don't make sense visually all of a sudden aren't there. So, yeah, why this show plays out like it is. It reminds me of there was a show on Fox post Arrested Development, probably pre Netflix Arrested Development, but it was basically everybody from Arrested Development came in and did this really not very good show called Sit Down, Shut Up, where I believe Jason Bateman was the teacher or the principal or something. Same thing. It's just a radio show. You could tell there's no chemistry between the castmates because they all just came in, read their lines in a booth, and left. But it didn't have the optimism or the emotional connection that Arrested Development had, even though it had all the same parts. I think very much this is the case for this show. It's so broken so fundamentally, and I still blame the scripting, that it feels artificial, and it feels so artificial that it's not funny, but it's not so weirdly artificial that it sort of falls over the other side and becomes The Room or Mystery Science Theater 3000, a phrase I can't say. Yeah, so the packaging of it. And the last thing is leadership. And this is where I want to sort of maybe throw some blame, throw some shade a little bit, because you don't get to this show the way it is, the way it was delivered, without everybody in the leadership positions okaying this. You just don't. So either one person was making decisions and they never felt resistance ever, It's an animated comedy. I can't imagine how that's possible because the animators are going to have opinions. The director of the animation is going to have opinions. The writers are going to have opinions. The director of the show is going to have opinions. All this kind of stuff. And so somehow in the chain of command of making this show, leadership allowed the quality of this show to be exactly what it is. And the reason I think that's so much crazier than live action, where once you've got it in camera, you go edit it and you try to make it work. Animation doesn't end until it ends. Animation starts when they start writing and it ends when it's done. There's no additional process, because if you change a joke or if you change a character or if you change a thing, you can't just edit around it. You have to animate that. You have to have somebody go through the process of making that. And so these poor animators, like I've said earlier, are listening to the same joke that didn't work 1,000 times. And maybe they're speaking up, maybe they're not. I remember talking with an audio guy one time where he's sitting in a room and he's watching the layback for a movie I won't talk about, but because this is not my story, this is his, but he's watching the audio for it with the director, and the director is just like having a panic attack, and the director grabs him and is like, this movie's not going to work. And the audio guy was just like, even though he knew and his whole staff knew, he's right. The director's right. They're screwed. This is not going to work. I can't get into more of that because it's not my story. But my point is, people know, and the more you see stuff, the jokes sort of flatten out. So maybe there's an argument there that they've seen these jokes so many times over and over again that they've lost their ear for it. But that's when you go and you find somebody who hasn't heard the jokes before, and you you pitch them the jokes, you show them the reel, you show them what you're doing, and if they laugh, you go, got it. And if they're your assistant or your mom, don't bother because they're gonna laugh anyway. Joke time, show it to your girlfriend. If she doesn't laugh, she's probably just mad at you. That was a terrible throwaway joke. My point is leadership. Somebody in the chain of command allowed for this thing to happen the way it is. And it's just, that's wild. That's absolutely wild. Here's the thing. Depending on who's involved, how much money is involved, all this kind of stuff, different powerful people that are non-creatives, usually executives, usually producers, usually agents, blah, 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 will somehow get involved and see cuts of it, see, unfinished renderings, all that kind of stuff. And they'll do one of two things. They'll either go, oh man, this is garbage. I either need to say something or I need to just write it out. Or they go, I don't know, I didn't get it, but I'm not the audience, so I trust my artist. I think in the case of what happened here, it strongly indicates that because it's Mindy Kaling, Glenn Howerton, Sam Richardson, Constance Wu, showrunner Charlie Grandy, whoever was involved in the checks and balances, because I'm certainly not a fan of studio meddling. If you've seen anything about where I talk about movies, I blame studio meddling for a lot of it. At some point, everybody just believed that they were just going to figure it out, and clearly they didn't. And either studio meddling caused it to be the abomination that it is, or the opposite. Studio meddling let them hang themselves on their own rope. I have a feeling it's the latter, because Mindy Kaling has a heck of a pedigree, and her showrunner has a heck of a pedigree, and these Glenn Howerton, Sam Richardson, all these guys have absolutely undeniable comedy pedigrees. And so it just seems like, yeah, whoever was steering the ship either didn't know what they were doing, or they were drinking their own Kool-Aid, and they seem to figure out, or they seem to fail to remember the very one thing about comedy, which is you got to test it, because if you don't get the laugh, you failed. That's why stand-up comedians, before they do their hour set, their HBO special for 6 months or a year prior, they're all over the country touring, doing those jokes, refining those jokes, adjusting the timing, adjusting the joke placement, because you gotta workshop it. You gotta figure it out. You're not going to figure it out on the first try. You're just not. The exceptions are Donald Glover, Bo Burnham. But even then, they test their stuff because they know better. So clearly this show wasn't tested, or if it was tested, everybody that could have said something was afraid to. I'm convinced they let Mindy and her people do what they were going to do. And as a consequence, it's a dud in a environment where HBO is known for axing animated stuff, which sucks. But honestly, I'm not worried about seeing it go. I'm just not. None of the characters in the show are likable. I didn't connect with any of them emotionally. The same reason I stopped watching the Mindy Project is the same reason I can't stand Velma, because she's literally just Mindy, and that's fine. That's a specific kind of person. I would never take that away from her, but I'm not interested. I don't connect with it. I don't relate to almost any of it. It's it yeah. So, you can make don't eat bread jokes all day. At the end of the day, there's a deeper well of jokes that there's access to here, and this show really could have been right for parody, right for calling to attention the datedness of a show that originally aired in the 50s and 60s. There's a real opportunity there, and HBO is definitely the place to do it. But for somehow it became Mindy Kaling's new show, and it's in the tone of Mindy Kaling. And if you're either on board or you're not, and in the case of me, I can't get involved. I watched 2 episodes, and I really only watched the second episode to prove that the first episode was as horrible as I thought it was, and it really was. So, you know, I feel bad for everybody that was not creatively involved. I feel bad for Howerton, Richardson, Constance Wu, all the other voice actors. I feel horrible for the animators, because when this show gets canceled, they have to now go find another job somewhere. It's there's a hubris about it. If you're given the grand prize, which is if you're given a show, you now have a responsibility for all the people you hired to keep the show going. Otherwise, they're going to have to start over as soon as the show falls apart. And in this case, I'm pretty sure that's going to be like tomorrow or Wednesday. So, um, I don't know. Did you guys? Am I being too harsh? Am I being too of a bully? Let's look at some comments. Just got here, man. The show is tough. There's points made that straight up grimace, such as Velma's lines. I spit the truth with no filter, like every comedian before the hashtag Me Too. Yeah, for real. And there's no Scooby Doo. I totally agree with you. Yeah. Um, yeah, and I think that's everybody's point of view. Everybody's point of view is assuming it's an HBO comedy, and you're a person that watches HBO animated comedies, this show should have been for you. And clearly, it's for Mindy Kaling and the 4 people that hang out with Mindy Kaling on an hourly basis, because that seems to be the only people that connect with this. And that's fine. There's no such thing as a show that's for everybody. There is such thing as a show that's for nobody. And I think in the context of this show, yeah, I can't in good faith. I can't honestly believe that Mindy Kaling, especially considering she's got the Office pedigree. She was the 22-year-old writer in the Office writing room. Glenn Howerton, Always Sunny, co-creator. Sam Richardson for his own thing. Constance, who I don't think is a writer. But my point is, all the main cast members are like the thing that got them going wasn't their acting; it was their writing. And so the fact that either they straight up didn't read the whole script because they were just reading the lines that they were given, which is entirely possible. They're all extremely busy. They're all grown-ups. They all have families. They all have lives. They all have multiple things they're working on. So there's a real chance they didn't read the script, but there's also a real chance that they said yes to something, and by the time they read the script, they went, "Oh man," which is a thing that happens. Glenn Howerton, I think, may be the actual master of this in the case of what we're talking about, because he was on That 80s Show, the failed That 70s Show sequel pilot, which ultimately, derailed his career and got him working with Rob McElhenney and Charlie Day to make Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is basically a reaction to the failed sitcom pilot that he was supposed to be on. Um, yeah, I have no remorse for a show this vapid and inconsequential when they had every opportunity to succeed. I only am sad that it's going to hurt everybody that wasn't them, creative, like everybody that wasn't a creative person. And more importantly, what shows did this show displace? Because HBO wasn't just pitching for Velma. There were other shows in circulation that were in competition, because that's how it works. If one show gets put to pilot, 10 shows maybe developed, maybe, blah blah blah. There is a scarcity. I know there's not technically a scarcity, and if you're a writer, you shouldn't think about scarcity, because then you'll just defeat yourself and you'll never get anything made. But what I'm saying is, This show cost X amount of money and was probably 2 or 3 times the equivalent cartoon on HBO that wasn't the Scooby-Doo brand. Those 3 shows, if one of them made it, HBO will have made their money back and gotten subscriptions and all that kind of stuff. But for some reason, they put all their eggs in the Mindy Kaling basket, and it sucks. It sucks. And I don't know. I don't have a beef with any of these people. I don't have a beef with Mindy Kaling. I don't have a beef with Charlie Grandy. I just watched The Night Of the other night, or the night before. I don't know, the Christmas movie with Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Seth Rogen, and Mindy Kaling, for the 2 minutes she was in it, absolutely crushed it, because she does. But at the end of the day, the best thing that could have happened for this Velma show is it died in a whimper. But because it was on HBO at a time when there's basically nothing out right now, it had a big splashy, coming out, and it fell completely on its face and broke its glasses and stepped on its glasses, and now it's crawling around. A reference to every single episode of Scooby-Doo up until this point. Did she do it in this show? I don't know. She's wearing her mom's glasses, so I don't even know if that works. A weird reference that she's wearing her mom's glasses, considering she probably can't see now. Yeah. So, did we fix the show? Page one rewrite. Page one rewrite. There's no dog. There's no references to the silliness of this eclectic group of people who are incompatible to be friends together. There's no reference to that. There's no reference to, obviously Shaggy was stoned from every single second he was in the show. Obviously, how could he not be? Look at the guy. The hippie van life thing. I hope somebody makes a Scooby-Doo web series about van life, because that is a slam dunk, and I would watch the shit out of that. I'm good on Velma. Yeah, what did you guys think? How do you guys feel about it? And cautionary tale. Like, subscribe, share, whatever. I can't even say those words. I'll catch you next time.